welcome back to another spaceexplr episode. This is episode 45, and we have a very special guest on today. His name is Ross Clark. So Ross lives in the cloudy northeast of England. So of course he loves astrophotography. He get out whenever he can to aim to produce the best possible results with a usually low interaction stacks. So Ross was awarded Newcomer of the Year in 2019 at the Astronomy Photographer of the Year Awards held by the Royal Museums Greenwich. He had his work shared by NASA, Canon, Sigma, BBC, OPT, and others. And of course, if you want to see that work, go and check it out. The Instagram, AstroPhotoRoss, AstroPhotoRoss.com is the website. Of course, all those links with his work is going to be included down below in the show notes, so make sure to go and check it out and get in contact personally with Ross himself. So again, Ross, just want to say a big thank you for coming over today and taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Great intro. It was almost like I wrote it myself.
I think you did yourself, and that's a good intro. So look, I mean, I told you before we started recording, and guys, you should go and check it out, the Instagram. I mean, 250 plus, posts. And I mean, all of those are pretty incredible. So, but the beginning stages, I mean, can you talk about how did you get involved with this astrophotography hobby in the first place?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one, really. So I've always been interested, as with a lot of the people that you've spoke to, I've always been interested in space and astronomy. As a child, I wanted to be an astronaut. That quite quickly degraded to being a pilot, and that didn't work out either. But I did go to university and I studied astronomy and astrophysics, so I kept a strong interest in kind of space and that type of stuff. My job has got nothing to do with that. I just did that degree because I was interested, basically. And then it kind of, I suppose, fell to the wayside, as it does with a lot of people. You meet people, or you meet your future wife and have kids and things like that, and personal life comes in. But if I could pin it down to anything, it was probably about 3 years, maybe 2.5 years ago. I was on Facebook. I'd kind of been off Facebook, but I'd come back, and I just saw a post of, I can't even remember who it was. I remember that it was an Andromeda, and just reading the details underneath it, that it had been taken with a DSLR with what appeared to be a pretty standard lens. I just hadn't realized that that technology had kind of moved to the point that was a lot more attainable to kind of just equipment that you might have lying around. So that kind of got me going straight away. I had a DSLR in the house. It wasn't a great one. It was a really, really old Nikon, like really old. It was like, I think a D50 or something. It was like one of the originals. It was like 8 megapixels. It was absolutely useless for astro because the low light performance was dire. But did a little bit of research, and I suppose my approach into astro was quite a cautious one. I wanted to, let's say I've got a family, got kids, got responsibilities. Didn't want to drop a whole lot of money to something that, although I've got an interest in space, that perhaps I didn't have the time to do this astro thing, or perhaps it just wouldn't work from kind of my quite light polluted location. So I thought, if you start slow, learn some lessons as you go, and then just expand with something that's good. If it isn't, then you haven't really lost too much. So my approach was that I picked up a second-hand Canon 450D, which is a pretty old camera, but it's got great, low light performance for its age. Or it's good low light performance, but it's got good noise. It's got reliable noise, if that makes sense, which makes it easier to extract with darks. But I suppose we'll get onto that. I managed to get it with a 50mm prime lens, so for about £100 for the two of them together. So that was kind of how I started, just with a static tripod. I think on my Instagram, one of my very first photographs right at the bottom is a really wide Andromeda, and that was one that I took with a static tripod, with a different lens. Actually, I had an old Sigma, like 28 to 200 millimeter lens that was shocking, you know, like full of chromatic aberrations and the rest of it. But again, it was just something to start with, and kind of just seeing that I could get somewhere, I could take images, got me going straight away. So from there, I picked up a Skywatcher Star Adventurer, again secondhand, for about £200, I think. And then set about kind of trying to get much better. Obviously, that opens up much longer exposures. And that was that opened up, you know, I think I was doing 1 minute, 2 minute exposures, which, you know, when you're used to just doing literally 5-6 seconds on a static, is just night and day, the kind of the images that you can take with that. This was about August of 2018. I got married on the 1st of September. And kind of while we were away on honeymoon, I was kind of researching, like when we were just lounging on the beach, like researching lenses and things like that I could kind of expand into. And ended up picking up something that I still use today. You know, at this point, I hadn't spent a lot of money, and I don't think you need to. Let's say, I think there's a lot of cheap DSLRs out there that will do a very good job. You know, the pictures that I took that won me that award was that Canon 450D that was basically a £50 camera. Yeah, good cameras can open up a lot, but it's not the be all and end all. You know, a star tracker, if you're using lenses, is more than adequate to kind of take good images. But where I'd realized that if you do want to invest money somewhere, it's optics. You know, having sharp, kind of well-corrected optics that don't give you a lot of color fringe and makes a lot of difference to the kind of the end performance. So I managed, again, secondhand, picked up a Canon EFL 70-200 millimeter f2.8 lens, which is the original one. There's no image stability on that. So I got that pretty cheap. And like I say, it's something that I still use today. So it's kind of, it continues to run through 2 years later. And I still remember what really got me hooked. Again, to this point, I was thinking, that's a good lens. I can sell it for what I bought it for the next day. I mean, it's not going to have depreciated by me holding on to it for a couple of months. So again, I thought that was relatively low risk. But I still remember the very first image I took with the 450D, sat on the Star Adventurer, was, again, Andromeda. Andromeda is the reason I got into this, really. Just I always wanted to get a good picture of Andromeda. And I think that's common for a lot of people. A lot of people love Orion, but I'd always had this fascination with Andromeda. And just seeing that very first 2 minute sub in Bottle 7, back garden, quite light polluted, but it was there. It was obvious, you know, when I connected my laptop to the 450D. So as it was taking the subs, they were coming off onto the laptop, so I could see that first image, and I was just absolutely blown away. Like I said, prior to that, I'd used a very old Sigma lens that was like the type of thing you'd quite cheap with a camera, you know, like a 28 all the way through to 200 mil. That it was just no good for astro, basically not very sharp. So the difference with this one was just insane, you know. I've been hooked ever since that moment, just seeing that sub roll off. And then ever since then, it's just been about trying to get better and better and better. And I think that approach, that lesson in, or that kind of way into astro is a really good way for a number of reasons. One, like I said, a lot of people have got DSLRs lying around the house anyway, so it's not something that you need to spend a lot of money to do. Star Tracker is probably the only thing you need in order to get started. But like I said, I mean, if you search online for some of the work that people do from a static tripod, it's absolutely insane, to be honest. But you know, you need a lot of patience for that and a lot of computing power, because you'll need a lot of subs. So realistically, small investment on a star tracker, because it opens up a lot of things that you're going to have to learn. So you're going to have to polar align it. You're going to have to, you know, understand a little bit about balancing yourself. You're going to have to understand kind of balance, leveling your tripod and things like that. These are all things that you're going to need to know, and then some, when you end up with a proper mount or when you end up guiding. And that's kind of what I did with the Star Adventure. The next thing I bought a bit further down the line was a guide scope and a guide camera that I managed to attach onto the Star Adventure and could guide it in right ascension only. There's no deck motor on there, but again, then that's something I could just take off. And when I got a mount, that just went onto the main mount. And you know, these kind of things, I haven't had a lot of waste. I think the Canon 450D is pretty much the only thing I don't use anymore, but that's just because I've come on to different cameras. So the Star Adventure I still use almost every time I shoot, because it's just such a brilliant, mounts are brilliant, great, you know, proper astro mount that you've got a telescope on, you know, accuracy is great, but they can be a real pain. It can take time to set up, and you know, they can give you issues that just cause you headaches. The Star Adventurer, you can throw it up in 5 minutes and be imaging almost immediately. So it's definitely not something I think I'll grow beyond. And obviously its portability is its major benefit as well. So I get asked, to your point earlier, I get asked a lot as to how to get started, to the point that on my Instagram account I've set up they released a new feature called guides, and I've kind of written a guide that is basically what I've kind of just said there, which is how I got started, why I think it's of benefit. You know, I watched your interview that you did with Joe Des, and he went the opposite way. You went all in and kind of and attacked kind of all those problems at once, and I really commend that, because that takes a lot to get over, and you need a lot of commitment and a lot of resilience. And the one thing I would say about astro: do not get involved in astro if you do not like solving problems, because that is basically astrophotography. You're going to be solving problems that you didn't even know you would have. You know, you're going to come up with issues, and you've got to find your way around them, or you end up kind of just getting frustrated or quitting the kind of the hobby. So it's definitely a hobby of problem solving, and I guess with a scientific background, that's probably why I enjoy it so much. But there is, you know, you get over all these problems and you end up with this image at the end, which is kind of the payoff for all of that.
Here you go. I mean, that's very good, because nobody, again, prior to yourself, nobody kind of brought that up from this perspective that you had, that it's a lot of it is problem solving. And I guess, you know, people, especially during this time, some people don't want any more problems, you know, so maybe it's something to think about. But at the same time, as I said, if people just start with it.
I was going to say, I guess, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the problem solving, but in the main, there are problems that can be solved. People have got problems in their life, but a lot of them, especially in the current environment, aren't ones that you can individually solve. Do you know what I mean? Where a lot of people's frustrations probably are with coronavirus and that type of thing. It's too big a thing for you to be able to deal with. But
yeah, so
there's a lot of satisfaction to be had with encountering a problem, realizing what the problem is, and then taking some steps to solve it, and then get the result at the end of it. It's very satisfying.
Mm-hmm. Good. So definitely, I agree with you on that one. So definitely, solving some problems, that will give you that kind of motivation to solve bigger problems when it comes maybe to you know, what's happening with the COVID. It's a great way. I mean, great reason probably to get involved with astrophotography. And again, looking by your photos that you mentioned, so the first photo that I'm seeing on your personal Instagram, and you guys should go and check it out, that was taken with a Nikon F80 and Made LX10. So basically 2000.
Yeah, so that was a long time ago. When I did astronomy and astrophysics at university, I bought an 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain, and we had a lunar full eclipse that year, a lunar eclipse, and that image was taken with a film DSLR, because DSLRs weren't a thing. I certainly weren't the thing that I could afford at that time, if they were even a thing. I'm not sure. So yeah, that was a film camera image. You know, back then, and I guess this is because I had some experience with telescopes back then. Mm-hmm. The only imaging you could do was with CCDs, and at that time it was so far out of my kind of budget, it wasn't even worth considering.
Yeah.
And because I then moved away from it and come back, I'd kind of missed this whole wave of low light DSLR improvements, and even now CMOS. You know, even 2 years ago when I got into when I started with the DSLR, even the CMOS cameras that pretty much everyone has now, not everyone, but you know what I mean. Once you start spending some money, there's a lot of people that have got just jumped straight in on the cool CMOS, ZWO, Altair cameras, QHD, that type of thing. But even 2 years ago, I didn't feel that when I was searching, you know, the groups on Facebook and Instagram that there was that many people with them. You know, they're kind of the way they've come through is so quick. You know, the market is, astrophotography is such a quick moving hobby currently. You know, there's a lot of tech, a lot of expansion. It's quite exciting to see. You know, when the standard is just incredible. Amateurs kind of all over the world. It's, you know, it's great to try, and you know, my aim when I started was to try and produce images that could compete to a degree. But you know, people looked at and thought these are good images, but we're done with relatively low cost kind of bits of equipment, and that's kind of the way I started. That's probably not where I'm at anymore with the equipment I'm using now. But you know, my aim currently, because I live in the northeast of England, and it's still true, we do not get a lot of clear skies. You know, even if we get a clear night, you know, it's rare to get a full clear night. So my approach has not been to go down the mono kind of route that a lot of people do go down, mainly because, although I've got some patience, I do like to produce an image at the end of it. Because our forecasts aren't very predictable, you know, I understand that mono cameras are more sensitive, and you know, you can get in effect more data in a shorter period of time than you can with an OSC. But the things that you do have to do is you obviously need to switch from filter to filter to filter to filter. And the issue with doing that for me is the forecast changes halfway through the night, and you end up with only collecting two filters worth of data versus the 4 that you intended, and you end up then having to put that to one side and you wait until the next clear night. I like to be able to collect my data and then produce an image from it. Now I've planned to get 8 hours worth, but the weather might mean I only got 2 or 3 or 4, and yet that means I produce a lower quality image than what I'd have liked, but I still get to produce an image. And kind of my cadence of producing images is pretty high. I probably post, you know, once a day, probably. And given that we can go weeks at a time without any clear weather, it means I collect a lot of data when it is clear, and I kind of have a backlog that I kind of work my way through. But I think the data collection element, a lot of people have good data. It's not, once you get over a few technical elements and kind of understand what it is that you're doing, I think the technical side of it, I think for me, I focus on focus. One, you know, get good polar alignment as good as you can manage. The second element is focus. That 70 to 200 millimeter lens, you know, is great attached to a DSLR when it comes to focusing. Focusing it when it's attached to an Astro cam is a nightmare. You know, you need absolutely tiny movements to go from in focus to completely out of focus. So I'd often spend 10 to 15 minutes making sure that is absolutely spot on, because it's like, again, I don't have nights and nights and nights and nights of clear runs. So I have had it before where you spend the whole night, you collect the image, you process it, and it's out of focus. And it's just such a waste of time, so disheartening. So I really try my best to make sure that, you know, everything's set up correctly, so that data is going to be good data, and then it's down to the processing. And then the processing is a hobby in itself. You know, there's a lot of guys, I've seen a lot of guys, there's a lot of young guys coming through on Instagram, and there's a lot of guys that have started that don't have their own kit yet. You know, they're like under 18, they don't have kind of the money. So they're like processing stuff from NASA, they're processing kind of, you know, some of the observatories like Deep Sky West, they produce, you know, free data sets, and
Mhm.
and they're making incredible jobs of kind of processing, you know, this data. And that's almost a hobby in itself. And I have to say, you know, I really love the processing side of it. My wife would attest that, you know, I'm probably a bit addicted to the processing side. And I'm certainly a reprocessor. So I think
Mhm.
there's an image, one of certainly what I would say was one of the better images of IC1396, the Elephant Trunk Nebula. Now I collected that data on New Year's Day this year, so 2020 New Year's Day. But the version of it that I'm happy with, I don't think I published until like June or July, and it was probably my fourth or fifth, maybe even more kind of version of it. I just continually go back, continually learning new methods, introducing new elements into the process and kind of technique, and then I actually love it when I find something new. And I get to go back through my entire back catalogue and say, right, does that mean I can improve this image or get a better output of this image or something that I'm happier with? So yeah, the processing side of it is absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to mention again, coming back to your point, what you talked about Andromeda, and again the current equipment that you've been using at that time. We're talking about DSLR 50 millimeter. There was static camera, and what else is there? So basically, process and Photoshop. You can see that image if you're going to scroll to the bottom of the Instagram. You're going to see going from there, going to. So what do you use? Canon 450D 200 millimeters. So CLS filters, storage venture stacked with astropixel processing. And I mean, the difference that you're going to see in those two images is, you know, it is just completely different. So that's what we're talking about getting equipment, again, post-processing softwares, and, you know, finding out the information, because, you know, all the time when I'm talking with astrophotographers just like yourself, like, there's a sense that the learning curve in astrophotography is just infinite, because at the same time, while I'm talking with you, like, you can see the quality of the pictures is just getting better. And the way, again, as you're talking, post-processing is a great way to kind of personally express yourself as an artist, right? Because you're going to see a lot of those different, let's say, nebula or galaxy images on different astrophotographer Instagram, let's say, platforms. And those images will look a little bit different, or maybe sometimes completely different, of just because what people prefer to to see themselves visually, right? So it's a good way to express yourself at the same time. But talking about that learning curve, you know, because I mean, there's a lot of information. So I'm very happy again that you're coming on today and, you know, sharing your personal journey and tips and strategies how people can start. And a lot of that is passion, you know, like getting inspired. I think it's kind of the biggest, you know,
Yeah.
key point. Because if you're not going to get inspired, as I said, you're going to come across a few issues, a few problems, and you will be like, no, I'm just sick of that, because you don't have a big enough passion. So my question would be for you is, like, from you know, astrophotographer, as being passionate about it, like, what will be the personal reason maybe for you, and of course Andromeda is being one of them, and for the people, the message, why should they pursue astrophotography as the hobby?
I mean, for me, it just every now and again you'll be out in the back garden and or wherever it is, you know. I split my activity between my back garden, which is Bottle 7, and about an hour away, maybe an hour and a half away, you know, I've got some Bottle 3 dark sky, a dark sky site that I visit as regularly as possible. And especially when you go there, you know, it's one thing being in the back garden and kind of looking up, and maybe seeing a handful of stars, as is common for a lot of people in, you know, areas. But to turn up at a Bottle 3 site, open the door in the car, step out, and immediately just see the Milky Way kind of over your head is just, it's just awe-inspiring. It's a place I love to go, regardless of how cold it is, and it's normally cold. But even about that, even if you can't get those kind of skies, even if you're doing it from your own back garden, I mean, collecting images of Andromeda, you know, that light self, 2.5 million years ago, when the Earth was a very different kind of different state with very different population. And the number of things that have happened from that setting off, from Andromeda's core, shall we say, the things that have happened on Earth, for me to be sat underneath it with a camera sensor and a telescope to collect that light is just, it blows my mind, is the only way to put it. Space is so incredibly large. There's so many things out there. There's so many things that are available to the kind of, that we can pick up and that we can image from our own back garden that most people have got no clue about. I think what's quite interesting about astrophotography is a lot of people can't connect to it because they've got no connection to it. So there's kind of obviously there's many different types of astrophotography, but what tends to be a lot more popular is when you tie in astro select Milky Way shots that are tied in with some kind of landscape that people can connect with, do some view of the scale. And galaxies always seem to do pretty well. I think people understand what a galaxy is and what it looks like, and that it's obviously very far away. But I think things like Nebula, people just don't understand what it is that you're kind of showing them, or how big that piece of kind of gas is really. And Andromeda is a bit of a one like that. I think people think it's tiny smudge in the sky, but it's 3 off the crop. It's like 6 to 8 times the full moon. It's massive. You could see with the naked eye, it would be insane. There'd be people running for the hills. But there it is, and that's the case with a lot of the other. With a lot of those, it's very diffuse, it's very faint, but it's massive. When I started, I wanted to get close, and my photography is very wide by most people's standards. The kind of tightest I've gone on any of my images is about 400 millimeters. And to be honest, I don't use that a lot. Most of my Nebula images are at 250 millimeters, which is the Red Cat's focal length, which I just got recently. So I've got a few images recently with that one. Prior to that, it was pretty much all at 200 millimeters with that Canon lens, and occasionally I'll go a bit wider. But now most people are imaging it, well beyond that. The kind of, if you're using a Newtonian telescope, you're probably at 800 to 1,000 millimeters. Obviously Schmidt-Cassegrains and that type of thing are even beyond that. So a lot of work with a lot of the fainter galaxies are much tighter nebula. So I like to do what most astrophotographers would call wide, but I've wanted to step back and go even wider again. So I think the image I shared yesterday, which is a 70 millimeter image with a full frame camera, so it gives you a really big field of view that kind of shows all that dust that sits in Taurus and M45 and the Californian Nebula. And I suppose I'm interested in that context, showing people a bit more of the context. I think an image a few days prior was a full 35 millimeter view of the constellation Cephus, but in narrowband. And again, just kind of looking at that, I didn't get the amount of data that I wanted, unfortunately. The weather stepped in again. But even astrophotographers, we forget how these nebula kind of interact with each other, or how they kind of relate to each other in the night sky. We'll focus in on, say, the Wizard Nebula, which is right in the middle there of Cephus, and kind of forget that it's just around the corner from all this other ones, because the way mounts work, and you kind of salute your target, what you're imaging is next to other things, but seeing it in that kind of whole view is kind of new in a way. So I really like that wide, really ultra wide kind of view, and it's something that I've noticed that I've been kind of drawn to do more and more and more of. And I've done the previous one of Cygnus, which is a lot more common target for that, because there's so much that is literally just hydrogen alpha. It's just a massive cloud of hydrogen. So it makes an excellent target. And Orion's another classic for that kind of photography. It kind of show the whole. Everyone knows what that kind of big view of Orion constellation. So many beautiful targets in there. But I guess I do it for the beauty of it, for the challenge of it. As many people as there are doing it, that doesn't mean it's an easy thing to do. Like I said, there's a lot of challenges, a lot of lessons. I've been doing this for, well, I suppose just over 2 years. So it was August, September 2018. And although I won an award quite early, I didn't, I think with that type of thing, you get lucky. Judging's judging. Do you know what I mean? That you can't, it's an art form in a sense. I was happy with that image, but I didn't feel like I really knew what I was doing. So I kind of, I got lucky, I'll say. And it's probably only the last 6 to 9 months where I actually feel that I know what I'm doing, that when I take an image, I know what I'll be doing with it in post-processing. I know why I've taken that image, because I know what it is that I want to show, and then I know what to do in order to show that in the final result. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of experience, and it's the processing element. The processing bit is I don't know how many hours I've collected in terms of collecting data, but I've spent at least 5 to 1 in terms of actual post-processing, practicing, and kind of, you've just got to. I use Photoshop in the main. I use PixInsight a little bit, and it's something that I'm kind of trying to get a little bit more involved with. But almost every image that you'll see on my Instagram has been like 95% processed in Photoshop. And I guess it's because it just suits my method of processing, which is a little bit, I like to you can see what you're doing, whereas PixInsight is about putting numbers into kind of modules and kind of
all about data.
Yeah, exactly. And although I've had good results from PixInsight, I guess actually the main reason is my laptop is not very good when it comes to that. So PixInsight is very slow for me because it needs a lot of processing power. So I like the flow of Photoshop. I can do things, and it's all you're not doing something then coming back half an hour later to see what it's done and then deciding what to do next. You've got that more natural flow of making your changes, and it just feels like a more natural flow to me. But
got it. So there's a lot of different reasons that why people should get involved with. First of all, I think, in my personal opinion, because it's cool. It's very cool. Again, when you think about something just like Andromeda, which is a lot of light years away. I don't know the exact number. I probably should. And and you can take that photograph basically the last one you can see. It's not far from the top. Well, actually, that was different. But if you take a look at it, like that, and like you can see that like on your screen when you're processing, when you're stretching the images, and you can start seeing basically that there's a different galaxy or a nebula that is 100 millions of light years across, and millions light years away from us, and like it's right there in front of you. I mean, it's pretty cool, to capture these things. And of course, it does take problem solving, again, putting all the pieces together, and when it comes to equipment, could be a little bit pricey. But for the beginners, as I mentioned, let's say somebody has a DSLR already, and they don't think it could do for them the work. They want to kind of upgrade it from the get-go. So what would you recommend when it comes to those pieces? The mount, star tracker, scope, and let's say some filters. What will be kind of your bundle, if you can say that, for the beginners?
I mean, like I said, to start, I think if you've got limited money, then for me, I would always say to overinvest or portion most of that to your optics. I think there's no getting away from good glass, and good glass will be good glass for a long time. Good camera is a good camera for a relative amount of time, and it will be superseded by better cameras. So you're always going to be putting money into cameras, but a good lump of glass is, like I say, it's a solid investment. So I think, second-hand DSLR, a small star tracker, something like either the Star Adventurer or Ioptron Sky Guider, something like that. And then, I'd say good optics. Filters are a funny one for me. At home, I don't shoot RGB. I'm not a big fan of. I used a CLS filter at the start, and prior to that, I used a. I used CLS to start, and I've also had an L Pro Max. I just don't like them personally. I think, you know, they cut out light pollution, but they also cut out a lot of the actual starlight that you're trying to kind of capture. So if you're imaging something like Andromeda, that's a broadband emitter that emits kind of light across the entire spectrum, and that includes the elements that are being blocked by the filter that you're using. So, you know, not only are you cutting out some of that bad light, you're cutting out some of your good light, which causes you issues in post. It also skews your kind of color balances as well, which just gives you a lot more problems to deal with in post processing, especially if you're new to it and you're not aware of that. You know, you might be kind of processing these images and wondering why it is they've got a funny color cast, or why, you know, the blues or the oranges don't look quite the way they should, or compared to other people's images. So if I do shoot from home in kind of RGB, I'll do it in full RGB. I'll either just use a DSLR, or with the Astrocam, I'll have a kind of a UV IR cut. So it still lets everything in, and then just deal with the light pollution in post-processing. I find I get better results that way. So I always try to steer people away from RGB filters. It was pointed out to me, a guy called Jason Gonzal, who's the vast reaches on Instagram's got amazing kind of images, and he suggested this when I was imaging a Galaxy with an L Pro Max to try it with UV-IR, and I give it a go, and I definitely got a better result with that. So shout out to him, and yeah, I'm certainly learning. I'm learning from other people as well. So I think that's a key idea. You know, I'm always learning. I'm always looking to learn. I don't think I know everything. In fact, I'm pretty sure I know very little. I kind of know my bit quite well, but if I step outside of that into any kind of other, then I'm more than happy to take advice from other people. And things are always just worth trying out. You know, you should be, if you're going out every night doing the same thing, night in, night out, you're just not learning. You know, you need to be kind of trying different things, trying to understand if you can get better results by doing something else. You know, I see a lot of people just having issues, but continuing to do the same thing over and over again. And, you know, I forget Einstein's exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, you know, if you do the same thing, you're not going to get, you're not going to get a different output at the end. You know, if you do the same thing.
Stupidity, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got to try different things, and they might take you the wrong direction, but you've learned something either way. And that's the same with post, particularly with post processing, I think, especially when you're new. But I'm going off topic. But what I do use at home is a very good narrowband filter, a radian narrowband filter, which is excellent for shooting in light pollution. It just isolates Nebula. It's got like 5 nanometer kind of band passes, so I can collect that hydrogen alpha, the oxygen, and it also collects S2 and hydrogen beta. But to be fair, those two emissions are pretty limited when you're shooting with a color camera. So it's mainly a lot of my images are hydrogen and oxygen kind of images, because that's what I choose to shoot from home. Because, like I say, shooting RGB from a light polluted site it's not a lot of fun, to be perfectly honest. You know, you're banging your head against a brick wall. You're going to be kind of, especially wide. I think you can get away with it a bit more. So the images where I'm talking about, where I do shoot RGB at home, they're kind of Galaxy images. They're kind of a little bit more cropped in. So when you're just looking at a much smaller element of the sky, it's easier to extract that kind of gradient than if you're doing something a lot wider, where you're going to have a really kind of complex gradient over the course of a night. As that kind of that target skews across the sky, your gradient's going to changes quite dramatically over that period. And when you add all that up in your stacking, it's going to gives you a lot of issues, especially with a color camera. I think, you know, that type of thing might be easier to handle, although I don't have any experience, but my logic says it might be easier to handle in mono. But So yeah, kind of what I've tried to do this year, which I didn't do a lot of last year, is at home I shoot in narrowband predominantly, 95 times out of 100, and I try and travel as often as possible to a dark sky site to shoot RGB, because it's just so much more rewarding. I mean, shooting RGB in dark skies is beautiful. It's, you know, the results you can get from that and I think it's becoming rarer. I think I've kind of stepped back towards that because, you know, if you scroll through most astro feeds, a lot of it is narrowband, a lot of it is mono narrowband, and they're beautiful images, don't get me wrong. And, you know, I produce many myself, but there's something about RGB images that is so appealing and it's becoming rarer because you know, few people have access to those kind of skies to get really good RGB images. So, and I think, and I've also kind of gone the other way as well in terms of dust. You know, I'm loving dust. Dust is amazing. I mean, one of my favorite images, one of my favorite targets is the dark shark in Cephas. I've taken various attempts at it. It's something actually that I am determined to try and get from home, which is a bit of a challenge because you need to shoot it in RGB. And like I say, I'm in light polluted skies, and getting dark nebula from light polluted skies isn't the easiest thing in the world. So there's a little bit of an ongoing challenge. It's something I keep trying to do. But so to get back to your original question, which I've kind of sidetracked off massively, I would say, you know, whatever camera you've got, but the best camera is the camera that you've got. So if you've got a camera, try it out. You never know, might be pretty good. If it's within 10 years old, it's probably got some uses. If you can spend money on glass, great. If not, you know, like say if you've got a DSLR in the house, you've probably got a lens. Give it a go, see what you can get. You'll probably need a tracker. I would try and avoid filters because I think people use them as a crutch. I think that you need them. You can image without them. You know, try without it. And I think, to be honest, that is all you need to start. You do not need anything else. And it gives you a sense of, you know, you can try things out. You can see what you like to shoot. You know, there's guys that love shooting galaxies. There's guys that love shooting the sun. There's guys that love shooting the moon. I can't stand the moon. It does my head in. I mean, whenever we have a clear sky, it seems to be when there's a full moon, which, you know, just drives me up the wall. And I don't have the reach because I don't really have anything beyond 400 millimeters. I don't have a lot of focal length for shooting things like the moon, planets. But I would love to get into planetary imaging. It's a completely different field. It's completely different. But that might be your thing. You know, you might say, actually, I really fancy that, and then that would take you down a completely different line of what you would need to purchase. And you know, amount's not as important because your image, you take a much shorter kind of image length. So, you know, you don't need that stability for a 5-minute, 10-minute image that you do for deep fields, you know, and narrowband and things like that. So the equipment that you need to buy is very different, depending on what it is that you want to do. So that would always be my recommendation because, like I said, the initial money that I spent, I still use today. So, you know, I could have sold it, could have decided it wasn't for me and sold it and not really lost a lot of money. Or you kind of just fold it in. So yeah, I still use that 70-200 millimeter lens when I'm not using it in my main mount. I think the image from a couple of days ago, again in Andromeda, I keep coming back to Andromeda because why not? You know, that was taken with the Canon 6D, but with that original 70-200 millimeter lens that I got 2 years ago on the Star Adventurer. So I can use that as a secondary setup, so I can collect data while my main setup was aimed at M78 and the Boogeyman Nebula. That is the reason I went. But while I was doing that, I've got a Star Adventurer, I've got a DSLR, I've got a lens that isn't attached to the telescope, or attached to the mount. So why not point that at something else at the same time? And this is kind of, you know, it's about maximizing your time under skies, especially dark skies, because it's rare. It's rare that I've got a good enough forecast that it makes sense to drive for an hour and a half to then set up, take your images, and then drive home, and then go to work the next day, or family commitments. So it's, I do like to, when I do get there, get as much data as possible. So anything that can take a picture is taking a picture. So yeah, I think that's all. They're the only things you need to get started, and then just let it come to you. Take images of different things, see what you get enjoyment from, see what what you like processing, what you like imaging, and just follow that route, because they're all different routes and they all require different investments. So I think to try and prejudge that is a bit risky, because I didn't know I was going to get really into kind of shooting nebula. I might have actually, because I loved Andromeda, perhaps I would have gone more into other galaxies and things like that. But that's not the way it's gone. So had I bought a giant, a 10-inch or an 8-inch Schmidt Cassegrain to start with, or an Edge HD, something like that, perhaps I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much as I enjoy what I'm doing now. So I think there is a benefit to that slow and steady, learn bite-sized lessons as you go, rather than trying to bite off a lot and hoping for the best. It works for some people, no doubt. If you've got the attitude, then great, and it's what you want to do, then by all means get stuck straight in. But I don't think that's the case for a lot of people. I think a lot of people understand that it can be an expensive hobby. So I think it's best to kind of limit your investment early on. And like I say, if you've ended up buying a DSLR and a lens, well, if you don't like astro, well, guess what? You might like some normal photography and do things other ways. If not, there's a very big second-hand market for that type of thing. So you haven't really lost anything other than give something a go, and there's nothing wrong with giving something a go.
Yeah, definitely. So what is a personal take, of buying a brand new equipment? Because let's say we have people right now and they're committed to doing astrophotography long term, and whatever that may be, X amount of years. And would you recommend for them to go purchase a brand new equipment secondhand, or maybe you have a couple of kind of secondhand online stores that people can go and buy those pieces from?
It's funny. I've had a mix of both. I think general photography equipment, I don't really have an issue from buying secondhand, because I buy from reputable secondhand companies, or companies that have secondhand arms, so that if there's any issues, you return it, you're getting in touch with a company. So companies like MPB, I think they are in the UK, is who I've bought, or Park Cameras in the UK. I've bought my lens from Park Cameras. I bought DSL. I bought my 6D and my 450D from MPB. So again, if I'd had any issues there, I felt a little bit better in terms of kind of returning them to a company rather than buying from an individual.
Yeah.
So when it comes to actual astronomy kit, though, I've bought pretty much all of that new. I bought a camera secondhand, but it was from someone who I knew, so that I kind of wasn't like a stranger. And again, it's just that element of trust. It's about personal trust, I suppose, isn't it? How much you're prepared to put into something off eBay or someone from a classified ad. I think that's just a personal choice, but I think aftercare is a big thing. I think some of the problems I've got with Astro is who you can physically buy things from. There's not many companies around. A lot of the companies are based in other countries. So, a company like ZWO, if you're buying one of their cameras in the UK and you have a problem with it, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have to send that camera to China. And you're going to be without it for weeks and weeks on end, potentially. Which is partly the reason why my most recent camera I got from Altair, which is a UK-based company. I just felt like if I had any issues, I'd be that aftercare element, kind of from a company-wise, would be that little bit better, just because they're based in the UK, I'm in the UK, and that did come into my kind of buying decision, whereas it hadn't earlier on in the hobby. suppose I've been in it long enough where thankfully I haven't had any particular issues, but I have seen people online that have had issues, and how, let's say, how long that can take them out of astrophotography, because it's a key element to their kit. And it has to be sent off to, let's say, to China. And in the current times, you know, couriers are much slower and processing slower.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just something I want to try and avoid. So it's a difficult one. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the country you're in and the options you've got. I think obviously if you're stateside, those guys have got some great kind of options, you know, companies like OPT and High Point Scientific. You know, OPT particularly, I think, they've got a great approach to their kind of, not a lot of companies, despite this being a very visual hobby, kind of exploit social very well. Do you know what I mean? Most of the UK companies have no kind of social platform whatsoever, which I find really odd when you're kind of trying to sell telescopes and photographic equipment, that you wouldn't be kind of out there showing off people's like work that has been produced with the kit that you're trying to sell.
Hey, that's an idea for somebody.
Well, I mean, it seems pretty obvious to me, and OPT do a good job of that. You know, they share astrophotographers' work, and kind of they have a bit of a takeover thing on their Instagram account once a week, and highlight, you know, a photographer, and that's great. So personally, like I say, I think astro stuff I've bought new in the main. Photography stuff I've bought second hand, although don't think I've bought anything new. It's mainly been second hand, and that just comes down to the kind of options that are available. I prefer to buy from somewhere that I know I'm not going to have issues returning to if I need to for whatever reason. When it comes to those type of purchases, I think.
Got it. So what is your personal take, I mean, on the software and post-processing, as you mentioned? Maybe you can talk about stacking images, because there's a different approaches to that, and post-processing, as you mentioned, there's Photoshop and there's PixInsight, there's different softwares as well. I mean, for the beginner who never had, you know, experience with none of these, none with the Photoshop, none with the PixInsight, I mean, what would you recommend as a starting point for people in the beginning stages?
Yeah, I mean, great place to start. Obviously, you need to stack your images to kind of reduce the noise, and there's plenty of YouTube videos on the kind of reasons why you need to do that, and why people take obviously 60 images of something rather than just one. And DSS is basically the complete no-brainer place to do that. It's free. It's got a massive community behind it. It's tried and tested. To be honest, it's something I use 99% of the time when it comes to stacking. I occasionally have some issues with some kind of really wide images that it just can't stack it because there's too many stars kind of in the field, but 99 times out of 100, it's absolutely fine. It does the job. So DSS to stack your image. And then from there, you've got a couple of different options. I predominantly have used Photoshop. I also use a program called Cyril, which I don't know if you've had guys talk about before, but it's a French, it's made by a kind of group of French developers. And I think it kind of leans a little bit on some of the code that is in PixInsight, or some of the ideas that are in PixInsight, certainly. So it's got a form of kind of, the main reason I use PixInsight is for DBE, which is dynamic background extraction. So if I've got any kind of gradient in my image, or if for whatever reason I didn't take flats for an image, then I will use DBE within PixInsight to kind of either pull that gradient out or to flatten that image out. Cyril's got a version of that. Cyril's a free piece of software as well. It's nowhere near as good as DBE, but it's an option. You know, the main issue you're going to have if you don't want to spend money on something like PixInsight or AstroPixel processor, is removing your gradient, you know, and how you're going to do that. Cyril gives you a free option to attempt that. You can do it in Photoshop, but it does require you. There are some videos that I've seen on how to do it. It's not like manually without having to buy anything. It's not something I've done. I did spend money on a plugin from what's his name? I think it's called. It's Gradient Exterminator as a plugin for Photoshop. And that is something that I used early on. It's a guy called Russell Crown, or it's definitely Russell, I forget his surname. But it's a great plugin. And it can get, and like I say, it can get you over that hump, because I think if you, as a beginner, if you can color balance your image, if you can remove the gradient, then you've got yourself an image. It might not be the best image, but you've got a starting point that you can then look to kind of move forward in with, you know, other techniques, whether it's kind of color changing or the noise and all the rest of it. But if you don't extract the gradient, certainly for deep sky, you're not going to have a very pleasing end result if you've got a great big kind of left to right gradient in there. So that's kind of the first thing you're going to have to get over. Like I say, I spent a little bit of money on Gradient Exterminator to kind of help me early on, and it's something that I kind of use PixInsight for since then. But like I say, Cyril is a free option to kind of give that a go. There's a few tutorials out there to kind of get you going on that. But a couple of other good things that Cyril has got going for it is it does have a color calibration tool in it, similar to PixInsight. And it also has photometric color calibration. So if you're shooting in RGB, then you basically just need to tell Cyril where your image is pointing at in terms of what's in the frame, the kind of pixel size of your camera, and the focal length of the optics that you used. And it basically then kind of matches your image with the catalog of stars, and it knows what color those stars should be and adjusts the RGB components of that image to give you a photometrically color calibrated image at the end of it. So Cyril, let's say, as a free option, gives you some tools to get that color calibration correct and also to extract a gradient. So I would definitely point people towards that as starters. I think, let's say, I often use Cyril quite a lot even now, because it gives you that quite straightforward starting position, really. It gives me that. I think if you just use Photoshop, the problem that you have is, if you don't have a lot of experience, it's getting to a consistent starting point where you can then process it onwards from. So, the other thing Cyril can do is it can stretch your give you a kind of acceptable starting point stretch. So obviously, if you just pump in if you get your end image out of DSS and you put it into Photoshop, what you've got is a black image with a couple of pinpoints on it. So you've got a couple of issues that you need to get over straight away. Is how do I stretch this image so that I can actually see what's in there? How do I get rid of the gradient? How do I know that the color calibration is correct? And there's various different ways of doing that. You can't do all that in Photoshop, but doing it consistently, whereby I can put one image in there and get it, and then put another image in there the next week and get to that same starting point. You're really up against it to do that. So Cyril can give you that kind of consistent starting point. So stretch it, get rid of the gradient, color calibrate it, stretch it. And then that's somewhere for me to then start with in Photoshop. You've got yourself then a basic image, and then you can decide what you're going to do with noise and all the rest of it, the colors and contrast, various other bits and bobs that you'll do in Photoshop, star reduction and the rest of it. But I think had Cyril been around 2 years ago, I think I'd have got further earlier. I think a lot of your initial issues, certainly looking back, and I learned heavily on, Trevor's videos from Astro Backyard and a couple of other guys who were in Photoshop as well. You just experimenting a lot. And that's what I did. I was experimenting a lot, and sometimes it was, I was literally following exactly, So Trevor was imaging something completely different at a completely different scale, in mono, and I'm shooting in RGB, and I was following his steps exactly. And it obviously doesn't work because, you do different techniques for different image types, and then you're frustrated as to why it's not working. But there comes a point where you just have to put enough hours into it for you to start understanding what it is that you're doing, what impact it has on your image, and why it is perhaps you shouldn't be doing that, or perhaps, why you should be trying something else. And there's no real substitute for hours, but I think if you can get rid of those initial frustrations, and like I say, as a free piece of software, I think Cyril is excellent. I think it's quite highly underused, to be perfectly honest. There's some videos out there as to how to use it, but like I say, being able to get a consistent stretch, background extraction, and a kind of color calibration, it just gives you that excellent kind of, right, I know this is a good solid base that I can then move onwards from. Because if you don't get a good color balance, you're really up against it later on, further down the line. You know, once you've stretched your image, it's almost impossible to correct a color balance that's incorrect, or badly incorrect, you know, because I've fought it many a time. If you can get that color balance right at the start, you've saved yourself a lot of issues, a lot of headaches. So Cyril is an excellent piece of software. And it's something, like I say, it's something I still use now, not quite as often, because I've started going back. I suppose it was a lazy version of PixInsight for me, but now I've started to go back to PixInsight. It's and the other, actually, the one thing I should mention actually is that process on a Mac, which can be a real pain in the backside for certain things. DSS doesn't run on Mac. You can get a version of it, but it's very old and it's kind of ported in. It doesn't work the way it should. So I have to stack on my imaging PC, which is a PC, because mounts and things like that just don't talk they just don't mix with Macs very well. Although I think that is improving, but you just save yourself a lot of headaches if you've got a PC to run your mount and everything else from. So I have to stack on that. I then send it to a Mac. But Cyril is a Mac version and a PC version. So again, it doesn't matter what hardware you're running, there is a version of Cyril that could work for you. So I definitely suggest giving that a go.
Here we go. But, so go ahead.
Put more hours in.
Put more
hours. You've done 5 hours, do 10. If you've done 10, do 20. Just, you know,
it's never to you know.
No,
and
something that I said earlier on, don't process an image and decide, you know, that's not a very good image at the end of it. You know, it might not be, but just, you know, leave it. Come back a couple of months later when you've learned other things. You know, there's been data sets that I've got that I just thought weren't very good data. Wasn't very good data, but I've since realized I was just processing it very badly. It's something that I've got recently, or something that started recently on Instagram, is something called Reels. And a reel that I put on a couple of days ago was of an image, a data set that I got of M45. It was my very first visit to the site. I went there to hadn't risen yet. So I started imaging M45, waiting for Orion to kind of climb a little bit higher in the sky. And basically I've processed that data numerous times, but in that reel is 4 versions of data, 4 versions of that post-processed, but they're all very different, because I've learned a lot of different things over the years. So it's always revisit old data, always kind of go back and have a look at the version that you made, say, you know, 2 months ago, and don't use it as a target, but then just start again and just see where you get to. You'll have inevitably learned a few more different elements, or you'll understand your data a little bit better, understand what you need to do and what you don't need to do. And less is more. I mean, a lot of the image on IC1396 that I mentioned earlier, I processed that in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. A lot of times less is more. You know, we end up going down a lot of different routes, especially with Photoshop. I think you can certainly over process. I think some people think, oh well, if this has only took me 10 minutes, it's not good enough. But personally, I don't see that as an obstacle. If I'm happy with the end result, and it only took me 10 minutes, well, that is a result as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Well, maybe it takes 10 minutes for you because you put in the time and effort. You know, it's been quite a while right now.
No, exactly. Because to the point I made, you know, I understand my data, and that was a narrowband data collected with with that tri-band radium filter that I talked about earlier. Excuse me. And it took me about 6 months to work out how to process that. properly, in order to get the kind of, because hydrogen alpha is so strong compared to, unless you're shooting something like the Veil, where the oxygen and the hydrogen balance each other out quite nicely. In most targets that you're shooting, the hydrogen just drowns out the oxygen completely. It just took me a lot of time to work out how to process that, kind of push forward the oxygen to a degree and drag back the hydrogen, so you get that natural balance between the two, so that you can show the highlights of hydrogen but also the highlights of oxygen. Otherwise, what you get is just a red image, because that's how strong, you know, hydrogen is in the main, in most targets. And I see a lot of those images, and I was doing those as well. You know, a lot of, you know, something like the Heart Nebula. If you get tri-band data with a color camera and just process it at a natural intensity, you will end up with an incredibly red image, and that's great. Heart looks great. It's red. You know, hearts are red. You know, it works. But if you spend a little bit of time and kind of pulling forward the oxygen and dragging back the hydrogen a little bit, you can get really nice kind of balance between where the oxygen's strong, and then where the hydrogen's strong. So you get this kind of blue-red image, which has got a lot more kind of interest in it, a lot more color contrast. And that said, it just took me a lot of time to work out, a lot of failed kind of process attempts to work out how to do that correctly. Well, not correctly, just with some, there's no correct way. And that's another thing I do like to say. I don't think there's a right and wrong way to do anything. I think the Astro community can be a little bit funny, can be a little bit kind of, this is wrong, this is not right. You know, this is photoshopped. It's like, well, if you, to be fair, I don't think that would ever come from the Astro community really. But every single image has been photoshopped, or, you know, otherwise it's just black with white pinpricks in it, basically, if you're doing deep sky. So
that is awesome.
Post what you want is what I tell a lot of people, that, you know, post what you like. You know, what if you like oversaturating to the point where it makes your eyes bleed, so be it. Do you know what I mean? If that's what you like doing, and I certainly love a little bit of saturation. If you like, you know, pastel colors and less contrast, fine, do it. You know, I think as long as you're open and honest about what it is that you're posting, and I think you can do what you like. It's art in the main. You know, exactly. Once you've taken your data from linear data to stretched, you know, it's your interpretation as to what you think, you know, that data should represent, and that can be wildly different. Otherwise, this is a pretty boring hobby if there's only meant to be one kind of correct way of doing a target, and everything else is incorrect. So yeah, do what you want, post what you want. If you get a bit of hate, well, you're probably doing something right.
A bit of hate, it's always good, you know. It's because, you know, you look in life, and in this, we need to have a little bit of a thick skin, and at the same time, you will understand some people will come and give you criticism because it's just from a friendliness standpoint. They just want to give you an advice, and it maybe sounds like a criticism. And some people will come to you and give you criticisms because they just hate stuff, and they hate probably not only you, they hate pretty much probably everything that's around, you know.
Yeah, and to be, I think excuse me, although I am obviously on Facebook, and I do have a Facebook account set up for Astro, I do spend most of my time on Instagram. I find that the community there is a lot better, to be perfectly honest. I think don't spend a lot of time on the Facebook side of it. I think you get there's a lot of picky, a lot of ratty, kind of just salty kind of attitudes on there that I just haven't got a lot of time for, to be perfectly honest. I think I've got no problem with someone reaching out and asking why I've done something, or asking for help at all on any platform. But I just don't think there's a lot of that on Facebook. I think it's a lot of in the main kind of bad attitudes, or just looking to try and pick holes in things that you've done. Reddit is another example. I mean, Reddit's even worse. I've shared images on Reddit before, and it's just you know. So
I mean, it should inspire people. It should inspire people. Should come and say, "Wow, like this is awesome! Like, how should I start this as well?"
Yeah, I think people weirdly seem to take it that you're trying to kind of pull the wool over people's eyes. That you've you've invented something, that you've painted something in effect, and you're trying to call it a photograph of space. But I think it's just because in the main, I think there isn't that real understanding that you can image these things, or that obviously, you know, most people, you take a photograph of something, you press click, and then either on the back of the camera or on your phone screen, there is an image that you can see, and that just isn't the case with astrophotography in the main. I mean, you can do that. You know, if I take 2-minute subs in bottle 3 at ISO 2500 with a Canon 6D, then you can see the image on the back, you know, and that's amazing, but that's not the norm. That is not the norm. So yeah, I guess it's just a lack of understanding, but yeah.
So again, personally, I mean, you being involved now in astrophotography for quite a while, like what type of advice would you give to, let's say, beginner self in the beginning stages?
Well, I think I got things fairly right, as in, I think you have to do it for you. Do you know what I mean? I did it because I wanted to produce good images. I wanted it. There was a bit of a challenge in it. You know, I saw work being produced by other people, and I wanted to try and get to that standard in my eyes. And I'm still trying to do that. You know, I think there's, like I said, there's hundreds of incredibly talented astrophotographers out there that are not trying to emulate, because it's not about copying, but it's just about putting a standard of work out that you can look at and say, yeah, that is, as far as I'm concerned, that's as good as that data gets, really. I don't think I've got there with anything. So there's always that challenge to continually improve. And I think you have to have that in astrophotography, because I think if you don't, you'll run aground fairly quickly if you're not trying to either dramatically improve how you collect data. Let's say spending 15 minutes focusing an image, you know, might seem like absolute craziness to some people, but if I don't do that with that particular lens, I know there's a good chance I won't have an image at the end of it. Processing, you know, if I wasn't spending hours at a time kind of trying to learn new techniques, then I wouldn't have made some of the breakthroughs for me. You know, they're not breakthroughs for other people. Other people have been doing this for years, but the breakthroughs in processing for me, that, you know, I managed to produce a result that was, you know, so much better than my previous versions, that, you know, something's clicked into place. And having those moments is as good as the end product in a lot of cases. And I think you have to have that kind of that real attitude that you're trying to constantly self-improve. And I think it's about you. You know, I think there's a lot of people that look out and say, oh, well, this image it must be fake because I took something similar to that and I didn't get a result like that. And that's an incredibly negative attitude to take. If you assume that you are the best, that no one could produce a better image than what you have produced, I think, you know, unless you are, you know, winning awards left, right, and center, and quite obviously, you know, what someone might class as the best astrophotographer, you're kidding yourself, and you're closing yourself off to self-improvement. You can't learn with that attitude. If you're looking at someone else's work and saying, well, that's fake, or he's faked it, just because it looks better than what you've produced, then, you know, this probably isn't a hobby for you. You know, you've got to have an attitude of self-improvement.
Definitely. And you have to have humility and, you know, a lot of different pieces here, because look, at the same time, as you said, you know, you're producing this phenomenal work, which has been shared on NASA, Canon, Sigma, BBC, OPT, and you won a Astronomy Photographer of the Year award by Royal Museum Greenwich. And I mean, besides all of that, you mentioned that you're still learning from the beginners and other people at the same time. So,
well, I mean, there's a guy, I mean, a number of teenagers. I mean, you interviewed Yasser, who I speak to quite a bit, and, you know, he's 15, 16. Again, he started processing, you know, NASA images before he got his own kit. There's a guy called Hussein that does the same. He hasn't got his own kit yet, but he processes NASA images, and, you know, these guys are getting shares from NASA, like, you know, every other week. It's incredible. You know, a guy called Bowen, who's Boje Stella on Instagram. You know, he's 18, 19. He got an AirPod a couple of days ago, produces some, you know, incredible, you know, narrowband wide field stuff, you know, absolutely just jaw-dropping images. So there's a lot of talent coming through, a lot of kind of,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people kind of intimidated by that to a degree. I think probably astrophotography for years, because of the price of it, because of the potential cost of it, has been seen as a middle class, middle-aged kind of hobby. But because it's now a lot more affordable, it's a lot more accessible. In fact, it's never been more affordable and more accessible.
Yeah.
You know, you've got these guys coming in at 15, 16, 17, 18, they're everywhere. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to look very far on Instagram or Facebook to find these young guys, and they're producing incredible results. And I'd say I've learned something from each and every one of those guys, because they're looking at it a different way.
Yeah.
They're getting different results. And if you're not open to that, and like I say, you're just kind of, you have to be open to everything, I think, and choose what you want to learn from and which way you want to go.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to be open. You've got to be open to new ideas and new ways of doing things. Definitely. It's part of the whole hobby, you know. So
Yeah.
I think you've got to have that approach to other people's work as well as your own work.
Yeah.
You've got to be prepared to try new things. And that means looking at other people's work that might be done in a different way. And either saying, that's not for me, I applaud it, it's not for me, or actually that's really interesting, I might,
but don't hate it.
Like that myself. Yeah.
You know, don't hate it, you know, because it's
No,
a
exactly,
community. It's
yeah,
a
totally.
yeah, it's a great community, and it's, you know, friendly community, and everybody that I have on a podcast, you know, people just like yourself, everybody say, look, I'm available for the people, you know, I'm available, send me a message, you know, I can answer your questions if you're serious about getting started, or you have some issues when it comes to post-processing, or, you know, buying equipment, upgrading something, you know, those people are available, they're making time for those people, you know, so, and
Yeah.
you can have those talks with those people in that network, you know, but again, if you're coming from a perspective like hating and, you know, no, I'm the best or whatever, wrong attitude, you know, so it's, you're not going to go far with that, you know, because everybody who's here in the community, like people that you mentioned, you know, Yasha that I had on a podcast, so he's looking to do some great things when it comes to his personal career, you know, working for some companies in the future, and, you know, probably doing something related to maybe space exploration, space science, I don't know. But, you know, he's on the verge of becoming something great, you know, because he's young and he has a lot of great things in line for him. Again, because he's in, you know, he's in the community, and he's leveraging the community, making relationships, talking with people. And that's what it's all about, you know. So I do encourage people who are watching or listening to this episode, do exactly the same. Don't come and criticize other people's work, because I think it's ridiculous. First of all, you know, like, I'm too busy to make those, you know, things happen. Like, sometimes I'm too busy to comment, you know, under pictures of people's photos. So get busy, you know. If it's commenting something, make sure that you ask a question, or saying, hey, listen, Ross, that's a phenomenal piece of work that you did, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I get a lot of questions. You know, I think on my Instagram bio, I invite questions. You know, if you've got anything, you want to ask, then just reach out, and I'll try to answer all of, you know, what I would call the genuine questions. There's plenty of not genuine stuff, but yeah, I mean, I'm open to kind of anyone that's got a genuine question that they think I can help with. I'm more than happy to try, and to, you know, whatever experience I've got that can lend towards that, I'm more than happy to kind of answer those.
Exactly, because it says on Instagram, if you have any questions, just drop me a DM. So it says that on his Instagram. So I mean, this man is definitely dedicating the time and the efforts to teach you what it takes to get involved with astrophotography, which is definitely a very, very interesting hobby. And we're talking about something that we're putting a lot of time, resources, you know, people. There's a lot of different things that are happening right now across multiple space industries. So, like, on that note, aside of astrophotography, are you paying attention to what's happening to, like, with space exploration, space related projects? Maybe you have something on your mind that you would like to share about that people should pay attention to.
I do, but not massively. Like, I've got a passing interest. You know, I think the tech side of it is incredible. You know, all this, you know, the kind of the way that SpaceX has kind of come in and pushed things forward. I mean, just visually, those rockets are just, you know, watching those things come back in and land is just unbelievable. You know, on platforms and in the sea, it's like something out of you know, 10 years ago, if you wrote that into a science fiction film, you'd go, yeah, it's a great idea, it's never going to happen, and here it is. It's, you know, it's brilliant. And then, you know, the madness of firing a Tesla car into space is also you know, something that something I would like, you know, I would do. I have had the opportunity, so I commend them for actually doing that. Why not? But so yeah, I'll kind of catch, I'll catch, you know, launches if I can, or I'll keep an eye out. But I don't like set my alarm by them. You know, I don't make sure I catch every kind of live piece. But yeah, I've certainly got a passing interest in it. The kind of what's going to happen with Mars and that type of, you know, we're going to have someone actually get up there in the not too distant future would be a great thing. So yeah, that's certainly something I've got a bit of interest in. And then I suppose the next generation of space telescope, I think, is I forget the name of it. It's something. It's the Webb something. I forget, but
Yeah,
you know, it's a much big. Yeah, it's a much bigger scope. And you know, I mean, Hubble's been insane, and I think it's inspired so many people in itself. You know, I could certainly count myself as that as well. You know, the images coming out of Hubble, it's kind of just changed the world in many ways. Do you know what I mean? Like the people's view of what nebulas were and things like that prior to Hubble is very, you know, I don't think you can kind of try and say what the world would be like with regards to astrophotography without Hubble in it.
Yeah, there's a filter, you know, using Hubble palette.
Yeah, I mean, I can't do that with a with a color camera.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, it's like the Hubble, it's changed a lot of people. Like without the Hubble, it probably, because we're talking about, you know, thousands of images of nebula and galaxies, and again, just mind-blowing stuff. And now having, you know, James Webb, which hopefully.
But what's truly mind-blowing in a way is that how close some amateur photographers have got to
Exactly.
Hubble.
Yeah, that's
from land-based, bought off-the-shelf equipment.
Yeah.
What that says to me is obviously Hubble's it's been amazing, but it's an old setup that wasn't perfect when it launched. You know, there was that obviously quite famous issue with the optics that they managed to correct or put a fix in or a bodge in for it. So, you know, given that we've managed to kind of, you know, some amateur photographers have managed to kind of almost bridge that gap up to Hubble, and that's in space. You know, that next generation is just surely going to be like the next mind-blowing kind of set of images. You know, I'm really looking forward to seeing what
and we're talking Bortle 8, Bortle 9. That's happening.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of narrowband. You know, and again, narrowband, it's become so accessible. Like again, when I started, it seemed that like 12 nanometer, 7 nanometer kind of band passes were pretty much, you know, what you could choose from. And now, you know, 3 nanometers is fairly commonplace. Although not necessarily cheap, but it's not hard to get a hold of 3 nanometer band passes for narrowband. So, you know, when you're only collecting such a small part of the visible spectrum, then you're just blocking out all of that light pollution. So you can do it anywhere, especially hydrogen alpha. I mean, you can shoot that absolutely anywhere. I think oxygen's a little bit more susceptible to light pollution. It's more I've certainly found it more susceptible to the full moon as well. But hydrogen alpha is just, you can shoot that full moon, any light pollution you like, and you can get a good image in HA.
Here we go. So again, a couple of things that I wanted to mention is, of course, the software that you mentioned, serial.org. It's an image processing tool that you can download. As far as I've seen, it's a beta version, but as you talked about, I mean, it does a really good job. So go ahead and check this out if you've never heard or used that before. And again, the last question that I have for you here, Ross, is, you know, besides producing all this work, as you probably heard, I ask people that question quite often, because I think it uncovers a lot of different things when it comes to humans ourselves. But like, what is your personal legacy or footprint that you want to leave with your personal work in astrophotography?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. I guess what still surprises me is when people either reach out via Instagram or either on the comments or in kind of DMs, and kind of say that I inspired them, or I'm an inspiration to kind of them getting into the hobby, or to try and, you know, my images inspire them to try and get their images to that level. I always find that quite surprising, because I guess I don't look at it that way. I look at my own images and I'm trying to aspire to other people as well. So I suppose if I've inspired people, that if even one person is the replica of how, I said at the very beginning that I saw a Facebook image of Andromeda and that kind of got me into this whole thing. If someone's seen one of my images on either Instagram or Facebook, or stumbled across my website and decided I want to do that, then even if they don't get in touch to say that, I would be happy enough with that. I think just spreading the kind of the message of astro and the joy of this hobby to other people, I think that's more than enough for me. Although I would obviously love an AirPod as well, but we'll see.
Got it. So I'm sure, look, you're inspiring a lot of people. Some of those people, of course, watching or listening to this episode, it's part of those. And I mean, you already have a solid community of combined through, again, Facebook and Instagram, probably about 13,000 people that, I mean, you've got a ton of engagement on Instagram and a lot of people actually enjoying your personal content. So we all, again, appreciate you taking the time, because as you said, sometimes it's, leaving family behind and going, driving for some time and, looking to take these shots and, as many possible work that you can do and just come back home and take care of the family and go back to work. So we put in a lot of time and effort into this so we can go out there, and enjoy your awesome work that we can find, again, on Instagram, on Facebook. And some good idea for you guys and girls who are listening: if you go to astrophotoross.com, there are some great prints. I think it could be, again, a great Christmas present for a lot of people. Heart and Soul Nebula in particular, I like that one. So this could be a great Christmas present for your second half, or for the close people that you love. So it's awesome. Again, we missed a bunch of questions, a ton of questions. So I would be happy if you're willing to come back for another episode and maybe go on a few probably topics that we can go in deep. So for you guys, if you want to go, if you want us to go deep on a few questions on maybe one topic, leave a comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube or on podcast, just send a message to me, and I will make sure that we will cover those in the future. But yeah, just go and check it out. I mean, because it's awesome. I love the fact that you're inspiring so many different people to pursue exactly what you're pursuing, and people can see your personal journey if you go through entire Instagram. So that is awesome.
I think that's an important thing as well. I try not to just post my best work. If I have a bit of a nightmare, I'll try and post that as well, because it's all a learning curve. And we don't, even after 2 years, every image I produce isn't what I would class as brilliant. So I'll try and post everything, because it's
part of the journey. Part of the journey. Awesome. So Ross, again, for you personally, I want to say big thank you for coming over today. I love your personal journey. I mean, getting like inspired by Andromeda, and now you ended up taking all the photos of these beautiful nebulas and still doing the photos of galaxies as well. But I mean, the quality of work that we're talking about, I mean, because I'm just looking at the Instagram, you have to go, guys and girls, and check it out, because it's pretty phenomenal. I mean, I had a lot of guests on my podcast before, but your work is one of the great, one of the best works that I've seen, so far. So definitely, guys, go and check it out, and go and follow him and become part of his journey. Make sure to ask those questions how can I get started in astrophotography as well. And last thing that I want to ask you guys is to share this episode to your friends. So it could be any friend. Love him, hate him, don't like him, doesn't matter. Because people need to get inspired. People need to get inspired. And right now, we live in times where time is available. So make sure to send this, episode towards them and show them, look, there is some great hobby that they can get involved with. Again, doesn't require a ton of investment. And if you're looking for, to buy an equipment and you have those questions on what type of equipment to buy, shoot a DM to Ross, and he will be able to guide you through those decision-making, process times as well. So again, guys, thank you for watching. Make sure to go and follow up with Ross. Go and check it out, the websites and everything that is included in the show notes. As always, I'll see you next time. And don't forget, keep exploring.